Alrighty. So now I will start. Good to see you all. I hope you learned something from what Ms. Evans, Boyajian, Torres had to say, and use the resource. It's there for you, especially even if the library resources she wasn't talking about, maybe if those were not what you were focused on, at least the writing studio is a resource that I would recommend. Because I'm not asking you to do a lot of research for these essays. At least I have not asked you. But it certainly makes your work look better. For example, if you, the next essay is only 500 words, but and you're giving your opinion. But if you could base your opinion on something from the readings, or you could, find an article like on one of these resources, and you look at the article, and it can support your point of view. That makes your argument more solider. It makes it look better, and it increases your grade. Of course, you have to remember that you give the person proper citation and that you include a works cited page or bibliography, also called a bibliography, just so you know. One thing I would throw out there, that when you're using Google for searching, a thing that popped into my head, another operator that you can use is you use the cite operator, you use colons. And why? Because you can search for particular sites, and one way to find good material or material that will point you in the right direction is to use material that's coming from scholars and experts who are usually teaching at colleges and universities. And colleges and universities like Fairleigh Dickinson, what does its website end with? How does its website end? Is it .com? .edu. So you can search site, period, edu, or sometimes even just edu will work in Google, and you'll get also, and it will limit it just to educational websites where you're more likely to find good material. So if you search like religion and violence, site .edu, you're going to find everything from college and university websites that are related to religion and violence. You can even specify it even more, like if you're looking for articles, like journal articles or something published, you can put like PDF. It's probably a good a good search item as well, because 9 times out of 10, if a professor at a university or college has had something published, they'll have a copy of it as a PDF. It's not going to be a doc file or something. It's going to be, or an open document. It's going to be a PDF file usually, is how they'll get their article sent to them by the journal that publishes it. So they can send it out to people. They can put it on their resume and stuff like that. So just something that popped into my head that might be helpful for you searching for articles. Now, moving on. Talked about a philosophical approach to studying religion. I talked about sociological approach. Now I'm going to look at the approach which you could call humanities studies, the study of humanity, or otherwise known as anthropology. Anthropology. I believe I've already told you this before, or already, but the Greek word anthropos, long O, so there's a line over it, a different letter in Greek. Anthropos means a human being, and this word logion means a word or a statement. So words about human beings. Biology. Bios means life or living things, and logion, so words or statements about living things. Or you could generalize it and say the study of, as it's often translated. If you ask, what is geology? It's the study of the earth. Gaia means earth. or the rocks, but the earth is Gaia. So Gaia logion, the study of the earth, or of rocks, you could say. Anthropology is the study of human beings as what? As the creators and the creations of culture. Human beings are connected to this idea of culture. We make it, but it also kind of makes us who we are. In a similar way to what society does. So there's overlap with sociology. Just like the society we come from already makes us who we are, gives us our language, the values that we hold, how we live our lives. Same thing with culture. Culture does that for us as well. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Oops, I forgot. Hold on a second. Never put the definition. All right, well, I have the definition here. I have a definition of culture that I wrote out, but I did not put it on the PowerPoint, so I'll write it on the board. Culture is... What is culture, Dr. Dunn? A complex system. Culture. A complex system. I don't like that. Speaking right, Dr. Dunn. Helpful. Complex system. And knowledge-based ways of life. Of knowledge, belief, ways of life, ethics, law, here we go, life and acting, law, artistic expression, and any other customs or habits, and any other customs or habits received by a person received by a person group. Okay, so it's a long one, but it has to be comprehensive as well as specific enough. So culture is the complex system. It's not a simple system. It's a complex system. It's made up of many different things. But of what things? Of knowledge, beliefs, ways of life, ethics, ways of acting, law, art, and any other customs or habits that are received by a person as part of a social group. Okay? So, I mean, if I wanted to boil it down to a simpler definition, I guess you could say any kind of, customs, or I guess you could say I don't want to boil it down when I haven't thought about it boiling it down. I'll just leave the definition as it is. A complex system of knowledge, beliefs, etc., that have been received as part of a social group. And that's kind of the essence of culture, that it is a social group. It's not one person. It's a group of people who hold to the same views of knowledge. They know the same things together. They have combined knowledge as part of their group. I know I'm pointing at the PowerPoint. It's not there. just go with it. It's a reflex. Like their language, they have knowledge of their language, they have knowledge of their ways of thinking. Their ways of thinking come as part of their group. But it's very broad. It includes other things like law and ethics. It includes artistic expression, the way people kind of forget that, but the arts are part of culture and how we express ourselves as human beings. It doesn't always have to be science or thinking about scholarly pursuits and stuff like that. There's also that feeling aspect of where we kind of emote through artistic expressions like dance or painting or music, which are not scholarly pursuits, are not scientific pursuits, but also can embody knowledge and convey knowledge just as truthfully as those other kind of pursuits. The social group. So you see again, as I mentioned just a moment ago, this overlap with sociology, which specifically studies societies, social groups. But this is the system. We're talking more here about the system which kind of unites and binds the social group. This definition is based on the definition of a man called E.B. Tyler, who I'll get to in a moment, and maybe I should have gotten to first. But I want to mention that. Well, I'll skip over these two PowerPoint slides because I'm not sure why I wanted to include them. But this definition of culture is based on the definition that was devised by this man here. You can see a picture of him, Edward Burnett Tyler, or as he's just sometimes known as E.B. Tyler, Edward Burnett Tyler. Or E.B. Tyler, who is considered the father of anthropology. He is considered the father of anthropology. You can see his dates. Now, getting back to the definition of culture, what culture is, this complex system of knowledge, beliefs, etc., that one receives as part of your social group. As I said, this definition is based on something that E.B. Tyler came up with, and the definition that he came up with, this definition, is still pretty much accepted amongst anthropologists today. It's still considered a comprehensive enough definition, an accurate enough definition to still be useful. The word culture comes from the Latin word cultura. All right, so there's not much difference there. Cultura. Cultura, culture, they almost look the same. And cultura meant cultivation, as in agriculture. We still use it that way today when we talk about agriculture. You are cultivating the land, as in farming. So we still use it in that sense of cultivating land for farming. So cultivation is what its basic root or its basic meaning is. It also has the meaning of work, as well as training and education. So cultivation, farming is work, so cultivation and work, but it also has an extended meaning of training or education. To say that someone is cultured is often a synonym for saying that someone is educated. They know a lot, but not just that they know a lot, but they're able to apply their knowledge. So they are cultured or educated. So let me see if I can get this here without having to. There we go. So cultura also has the sense, even in Latin, of culture or of training or education. And let me write Latin here so you know it's from the Latin language. It's from the Latin language. But what's interesting to me, when I was doing my own research on the basis of the word, is that culture itself comes from another word. It has a root in the Latin language, this other word that culture is actually based on, the word cultura in Latin. And that is cultus. Cultus. Someone see me writing this? Might be off. Let's see. Let me do this just so when you see the recording, you can see what I'm writing. Cultus. And what does cultus mean? Well, cultus means honor or worship. Honor or worship. Now, this word cultus comes into English as cult. When we talk about a religious group that kind of has maybe gone awry, one might say, or a religious group that's kind of gone crazy, and stuff like that, oftentimes people refer to them as cults. And given that this is Halloween time, you can find all sorts of horror movies out there based on, cults, these religious fanatics. There's some leader of the group who wants to, commit mass suicide or wants the group to go out and kill everybody. And so, anyways, there's currently a one on Hulu, I think, or Peacock that about some guy who runs a camp for kids, and he's kind of like a cult leader in that sense. But anyways, so cultus comes into English as a cult. And there it comes into English with a specifically religious meaning. It's a religious group that has kind of gone off the rails. Or a religion, it's not used in a positive sense. Usually when you say a religion is a cult, it's not used in a positive sense. It's used in the negative sense of a group that has kind of a domineering, controlling figure or rulership, leaders, who control everybody, and there's an abusive relationship there as well. Usually there's the idea that in the cult that the leaders are abusive to the members, or members are abusive to each other. So it's not a positive term, but it still does have that religious sense. Cult. This did not, honor or worship in Latin. Okay, again, this is from Latin. Cultura is based on this word. And it does not have a negative connotation here. It simply means to honor the gods, to worship the gods. There's nothing negative about that. In fact, it's positive, because for the Romans, you should worship the gods. They're part of the world and part of the cosmos, the universe. And out of justice, they deserve worship and honor because they're higher beings than you, from the perspective of the ancient Romans in their system. So it did not have the negative meaning that it has today. I just wanted to mention cult because it still has the religious meaning that it had, okay? And that it kind of has lost in cultura. If I told you that culture, the word culture, was actually at its root and its base a religious word, you might say, well, how? And you might not have seen, now that I've pointed it out to you, seen that religious basis here in the word cult, cultura, honor and worship. I remember the numinous experience, and I talked about how the numen in Latin was a name for kind of like spirits of the farmers, spirits of the field. That, again, if you're a farmer, you had to kind of pay homage or honor the spirits of the field, the numina, as would be the plural, the numen of the field, in order to have a good crop, so that your food didn't rot, or that it grew properly, that there wasn't a blight or a drought or something on your field, because you didn't properly honor the numina, the spirits of the field. Remember that Rudolf Otto used that idea for his numinous experience. You have this kind of spiritual experience of awe and yet attraction to the sacred. Okay, he used that he used that idea of the numen. Well, again, you see this connection to farming. Worship. You worship the spirits in order to give you a good harvest. So the root of culture is religious. Which I found interesting. And what unites society, what unites the social group, is how they all together honor the gods or the spirits or their ancestors. Okay, that's another part of the story. I talk about gods and spirits, but even honoring the ancestors is religious, because the ancestors, the people that you've known, that you're related to, they die and they go somewhere. But you still need to honor them, just like you would if they were alive. And yet they're not visible to you. They're invisible because they're in some other place. So that act of honoring the gods and spirits or the ancestors is what unites society. So religion is basic to human society. And anthropologists can attest to this, because there hasn't been one human society that has been found by anthropologists that you could properly call atheistic. There might be some where the religious element is very much in evidence, say like Jewish society, something like that. And there might be tribal societies where they don't really talk very much about spirits. They're there, they believe in them, but they don't really talk about gods and goddesses or religion and stuff like that. They just go about their daily business. But if you investigate enough, do you believe in the ancestors? Oh yes, where are they? Oh, they're in the Neverland or the dream world or something. They're in some other invisible place that we can't see, but we know they're there. Okay? And sometimes they can come communicate to us. Oh, okay, now you're getting into religious territory. So anthropologists have not found any place or social group where religion, as we might call it in modern times, is not found. Maybe not highly valued. Maybe in some societies it's clearer than in others, but it's there. Anthropologists will describe religious beliefs and practices as they find them in the living communities of humanity. So just like with religious studies, they're there to describe. They're not there to judge the cultures that they're studying. They're there to describe them, and to the extent that they find religious beliefs and practices, they describe what's going on and what these things mean to the people in the community that the anthropologist is studying. For anthropologists, religion unites people. It's a uniter of a social group. It unites the people in a shared experience and a shared explanation of life. It gives them meaning, the meaning of the world. They know where the world came from, why the world exists, what they're supposed to do in it. And usually, if you listen or read the mythologies of these groups, the world centers around their social group. The world was created for them, and the gods and the spirits are usually very much like the people that are there in that area. So religion unites them, and it offers a pattern of behavior. It tells them what they need to do with their lives, what their purpose is in their group, in their social group, but also in the world, you could say, I think. No, I'm not going to mention that. As I said, this man, E.B. Tyler, Edward Burnett Tyler, is considered the father of anthropology. You can see when he lived, 1832 to 1917. Why is he considered the father of anthropology? Well, he was British. He was from Great Britain, and he was born into a wealthy family. And at a certain point, he took over the family business, but at a certain point found that his health was failing. He was sick. He had an illness of some sort. Given the time during which he lived, they didn't know what to do with it. So, he went to doctors, but they didn't know how to treat him. They treated him in the best way that they knew in the 1800s, which was there was this medical theory that illness was caused by the air you breathe. Like there were different ethers, or there were different atmospheres in the air. And by breathing certain types of air, it could make you healthy or it could make you sick. Sometimes you hear, even today you hear this. I mean, it's completely, it's complete bunk. I mean, no, the scientific establishment, the medical establishment does not believe this anymore. But at the time, they believed this. But sometimes you still hear this idea. You'll hear people say, "Oh, well, it's such a healthy climate, Go down. I wish I could live down in the Caribbean where it's, it's warm, but it's not hot. You've got the nice salty breezes from the ocean. It's comfortable. It's a healthy climate. It's a climate that I could thrive in." Whereas you go somewhere like Alaska, where it's freezing cold most of the year, and your bones are shaking. I don't know many, you might like the cold. I'm not saying that to like the cold is something wrong with that, but not a lot of people are saying that, yeah, Fairbanks, Alaska has a real healthy climate. Maybe Tampa, Florida. Yes.
I always thought that meant because over here, in the Southwest, there's a lot of pollution in the air.
Yeah.
So when you go to other places, the air is kind of healthier because we're not breathing in all the smoke. That's what I thought it meant.
That's a good point, and I would say that you're correct. I would say that you are correct, because if you're sucking in pollution, then that is not healthy. But that's not what they meant. In the 1800s, what they meant was that a hotter climate, a humider climate, like you would find in, say, Mexico or Central America, was supposedly healthier for the body than he's from Britain, so a colder climate, so one of the, what doctors would recommend, take a trip to a warmer climate. So in his case, they recommended that he go to, as I said, Central America, where it's hot and humid, because they thought that would make him healthy. They didn't at this time in the 1800s, they didn't have a real conception of germ theory and how illnesses were spread with bacteria and germs and viruses. Put that out of your mind. They didn't really have that idea. At least they didn't know how germs and bacteria and viruses worked. So, they just simply thought, well, it's the air you're breathing. The air you're breathing is unhealthy for you. So you need to go to a different climate. And usually that meant a warmer climate, maybe a drier climate, like someplace in the Middle East or someplace. But a humid climate was considered, I think, best. Why, I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But so that's where he went. He went down to that region. I think he went to southern Mexico and Central America. Well, I know he went to Central America, but I also think he was in parts of Mexico. Why? Because he wrote about it. He wrote a book about it called Anahuac, or Mexico and the Mexicans. Ancient and modern. Although no, I don't think we would consider the 1860s to be very modern in Mexico now. But anyway, but at the time it was modern. When he was living, it was modern Mexico. So what did he do that makes him the father of anthropology? Well, he went there for a completely different reason, which was his health. He was advised to stay in a warmer climate. But while he was there, he was fascinated by the culture that he saw, which was so different from what he experienced in Great Britain. And so he took careful notes of the customs and beliefs of the people. And it also sparked an interest in him in what you could call primitive cultures. Now, Native Americans are not primitive. But again, in his mind, they didn't have the modern amenities of what he had in Great Britain. They didn't have modern science. They didn't have some of the true developments of modernity. So he considered them at a lower level, primitive. But they did have culture, and so he became interested in studying these primitive, maybe less developed cultures. Maybe less developed is a better way to describe it than primitive. So because E.B. Tyler was the first to really study human civilization in a systematic way. He's considered the father of anthropology. Just like our friend Max Mueller. He was had people talked about religion before Max Mueller? Yes. But he was the first one to say, hey, let's really study religion itself in a systematic way. And so he's considered the father of religious studies. The same thing kind of happens with E.B. Tyler. Hey, let's study humanity. Let's take humanity as the object of our study, and let's try to do it in a systematic, read scientific, wink, wink, way, because everyone wanted to be scientific. And here you go. You have what they call Mr. Tyler Science, anthropology. And in fact, in 1896, he was appointed Britain's first professor of anthropology. 1896. Erase this. If you didn't get a chance to write it down, that's fine. You can watch the video and copy it down from the video. Or I'll correct I can correct my PowerPoint to put the definition on the PowerPoint. So 1896. He was the first professor of anthropology in Great Britain, and in fact they even called it Mr. Tyler's Science. That's how, well, it tells you two things. It tells you, number one, how deeply connected he was with early anthropology, that they named it after him. But it also tells you, Mr. Tyler, but it also tells you science, again. This idea of wanting to be scientific, not a natural science, more of an art than a science, but scientific, using some of the procedures and ideas of the natural, hard physical sciences to apply them to the study of humanity. What was his view of religion? Did he have any ideas? Oh, Primitive Culture. I should have mentioned. There's another book that he wrote called Primitive Culture, where he talks about primitive culture and theorizes about it. Animism. Remember when we looked at our list of definitions, and one of those definitions was from Tyler. He said in his book, which book was it? I should go back to my list of definitions. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can find it quickly. List of definitions. Handout. Would it be under handout or list? Or is it over here? Let's see here. There we go. It's off the top of my head. I do not remember which book. No, I didn't give the source of it. Well, it seems best simply to claim as a minimum definition of religion the belief in spiritual beings. Now, where did I get that from? Which of his books? Is that Anuak? That doesn't sound right. But I'd have to look it up. I'd have to look it up in my notes. Because I did track it down. I found it. It's on the Internet Archive. The book is on Internet Archive. And that's where I found it. It's in the public domain. Just didn't give the source for it, and I don't remember it. Anyways, the belief in spiritual beings, which we can call animism. Animism. It's the belief that the physical world is inhabited by spirits. The word animism comes from the Latin word anima, which means soul or spirit. Anima in Latin means a soul or a spirit. So if you have an animated discussion, you have a spirited discussion is another way of saying that. Or if you animate someone to do something, you give them the spirit to do it. Okay, so we still use it that way today. So animism, that was his belief, and he believed that animism was the earliest stage in human religious development. And it was the most basic stage basic for religion, that religion was this belief in spirits. That was it. That was the basic idea of religion. Whoops. A second. So I want to lose my focus. I just want to make sure I didn't. And I still think that that's a pretty good definition. I keep coming back to it because no matter which religion I look at, I shouldn't say they're religion. I mean, I'm assuming they're religions because I don't want to prejudice my discussion about them. But you read like when we listened to Kavanaugh, and he talked about William Kavanaugh, and he talked about how how do you fit some religions into religions like Buddhism, which don't believe in gods and stuff. Well, yeah, they do. I mean, even when, the focus is not on a personal God in Buddhism, but the Buddha certainly believed that there were gods. He just didn't care about them. That wasn't his focus or his purpose. His purpose was human-centered. He was bringing a message to human beings of how to relieve their suffering. In fact, the Buddha describes himself as being like a physician, a doctor who treats a wound. He's not a theologian. He's not a guru. He's not a priest. Okay, so he didn't see his role as theological. But I mean, gods and spirits and demons pop up all the time in the stories about the Buddha. So I don't know where Kavanaugh is getting this idea that maybe Buddhism. How do you fit Buddhism into religion? Well, very easily. And the same thing with other religions, like say Confucianism. I think I mentioned this before. Certainly, maybe the focus might not be specifically what we call religious, but there is a belief there in some spirits or spiritual realm. And that's where you get in, I would say, to religion. I think Tyler is right about that. It's a simple definition, a short definition, but so often I keep stumbling over it in religions, and here we go again. There's a God, there's a spirit, there's something. Even if it's the ancestors, your relatives who have died, they're somewhere and they still kind of exist. Evolving God. I wanted to look at this view of an anthropologist. Her name is Barbara J. King, and in her work, because anthropologists study cultures, but they're also evolutionists. Remember I talked about Darwin, and of course Darwin came up with this theory that things evolved from prior simpler forms to more complex forms. And that affected religious studies, but it also affects anything that really kind of came into its own in the 1800s. It affected sociology, la science physique. Auguste Comte described his point of view of sociology as the physics of society. Physics, like a natural science. La physique sociale physique, excuse me. And anthropology is no different. The early anthropologists were very much influenced by the natural sciences, by materialism, but also by evolutionism. And it's still today. So we have this book by an anthropologist, Barbara J. King, called Evolving God, trying to explain how the idea of God is really an evolutionary process from lower levels, less complex ideas, maybe of spirits or of some kind of force, into God or a God. And so we have here her book, Evolving God, a provocative view of the origins of religions, or religion, I should say. Religion is common to all human cultures, so she admits that. I already told you that, but she admits that as an anthropologist, that religion is common to all human cultures, as it should be. I mean, if it really is part of an evolutionary process, and we all evolved, okay, then it stands to reason that it should be there. if it's part of that evolutionary process. Religion should be there. But defining religion is difficult. However, King settles on belongingness as the necessary element. What does religion do for people? It gives them a sense of belonging. So belongingness. It makes us feel like we belong. Okay, get to the quotation. I don't know if that's in the quotation. Well, I'm just looking at my notes for a second because I've got a long quotation from her and I want to see if I have it here in my notes. Okay, well, I guess I'll use the quotation now. A quotation from her book, Evolving God, where she describes this. Does anyone want to? This is from the introduction where it's just, I thought it was easy because it just, you take it from the introduction where she describes chapter by chapter what her argument is going to be. So here we go. Would anyone like to read this from Barbara King's book, Evolving God? Anybody? Yes? No? Ms. O'Connor, go ahead. Yes, the yellow. Good. Whoops, hold on, sorry. I forgot that I have my this in the way. Okay, go start over.
The hominid need for belongingness rippled out, eventually expanding into a holy realm, in tandem with and in harmony with the mind, changes in the natural environment, in the hominid brain, and most important, in carrying practices, something new emerged that went beyond and rule following and imagination within the family and immediate group, and that went beyond consciousness expressed through action and meaning making and hearing now. As I explained in chapters 6 and 7, language and culture become more complex as symbols and ritual practices began to play as a more central role in how hominids made sense of their world. An earthly need for belongingness led to the creating of imagination and thus to the otherworldly realm of relating with God, gods, and spirits.
Excellent, thank you. And this word hominid that she uses throughout the quotation, hominid is a technical term for early human beings. They're not us yet. They're not Homo sapiens yet, although we are hominins. We're part of the same group. We come from that group. But hominids are early human beings. So this is her theory that the development of a God consciousness comes from this sense of wanting to belong to something, to belong to the social group. Okay? And as the humans evolve along their path, it becomes kind of, I guess, crystallized or formalized in this idea of a God. This is the necessary element of religion. This is a quote from her book. Quote, belongingness was transformed from a basic emotional relating between individuals to a deeper relating, one that had the potential to become transcendent between people and supernatural beings or forces. So it evolves from the belongingness that we all have together as hominids, as human beings, but she says it goes deeper than that. It expands to include some transcendent society as well. Gods, spirits, a God. And this is evolutionary. She's basing this on what her theory of an evolutionary basis for religion. King believes that humans crave emotional connection with others, that's hardwired into us from the evolutionary process. We want to be with others and to be loved by others or taken, not taken care of, but belong to the group, I guess you could say. So we crave that emotional connection. And she explains it as how we became the spiritual ape. That's her description of it. We became the spiritual ape. We were apes that grew a large brain, that stood up, created art, but above all that, we are the ape that evolved God. We are the primate that reached up to a high, we're able to transcend even the group, to extend the group into the beyond. So religion is about belongingness, feeling deeply for another creature, and caring to act compassionately. It also includes being in awe of the unspeakable. For her, belonging is emotional. It's an emotional state. Okay, so you are, I guess, when you feel like you only truly belong when you're in the presence of the sacred. You have this feeling of an awe-inspiring moment that transcends even your social group. It includes everything. And so that's religion. That's God. Or you could call it God. King says that religion evolved to serve humans' need for belonging and relationship. It evolved to fulfill the social network that we need. What can all of this mean for religion and what can all of this mean for religion and violence? What does this have to do with religion and violence? Well, if religion is so embedded in the meaning of culture, if the word culture, cultura, even has the word which is religious, cultus, embedded in it, does it not make the boundary between purely religious violence and other forms of violence fuzzy? It makes it fuzzy to say that this is culture and this is religion, and that religion itself does violence in and of itself, and then culture does violence in and of itself, when actually even the word culture has a religious basis in cultus, in the Latin word cultus. So it kind of blurs the lines between what is properly religious, what is properly culture, and is there not sometimes, or maybe often, an overlap between the two? Religion does violence, but it carries its cultural baggage with it, whereas cultures come along and they carry their religious baggage. Think of like colonialism, where you had the British, who were Christian, you had the Portuguese who were Christian, you had the French who were Christian, all going throughout the world and setting up colonies in these different cultures, like India, of course the New World here, but also places, they had colonies in China, throughout Africa. And yeah, was that religious violence because it was also a cultural colonialism? How do you tell? How do you distinguish the religious element from colonialism from just simply the political or cultural element? And vice versa. It goes the opposite way. Because this is an issue, because in places like India, they're very touchy about Christianity, because Christianity came with the colonial powers. Christianity was forced on us by the British. They brought it here. Or was forced on us by the Portuguese, who brought it here. Well, they certainly brought their culture when they colonized, and part of that culture is the cultus, the religion. It's just like they brought their language. It's interesting that you don't hear, at least maybe I'm not listening enough, but I have not come across anyone complaining. I have not come across any Indian complaining. In India, I mean India from India, the subcontinent of India, complaining about the fact that their common language is English. I mean, there are dozens, I should say dozens, but there are many, many different languages in India. It's a rich, old culture. And a lot of these languages are not intelligible. They're not understandable amongst themselves, sometimes because they're from different language families. So they use English. Well, where'd they get English from? The British. Okay, but where they also get, that was part of the British culture. But where they also get the churches and the universities, well, those were founded usually by religious organizations, which also came with the culture. So how do you distinguish the two? Where does religious violence per se end, and where does the cultural violence start, and vice versa? And does culture influence the religion? How does culture influence the religion? What if the culture itself is violent? What do you do with that? For example, just to give you one example, stories about one of the bringer, well, it wasn't the bringer, but who Christianized the Scandinavian countries. Like Scandinavia is Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And traditionally, according to the story, they were Christianized by this man called Saint Olaf II of Norway. He's considered a saint, so he's considered a holy man. But he didn't do holy things, according to some of the stories. Saint Olaf, II of Norway, who, if you read the stories, the sagas, the stories, these almost like mythology that they tell about Olaf, I mean, he was a very violent guy. He converted people to Christianity through in some cases, very extremely violent methods. But here's the catch. Scholars are not sure if those stories are actually true. They're not sure if Olaf really did those violent things or if it's just part of the violent culture, because for the Northerners, their society, their culture was based along, for the pagans, it was based on warrior values. Think of the Vikings. War and combat and bravery in combat were the highest values for them. So it almost becomes like maybe Olaf, maybe he wasn't more of a saint. He was a good saint. He wasn't a bad saint. He wasn't a violent man, as they say in the stories, because the stories are trying to use that cultural value of violence and say, look, we can be just as violent as you. We're not weak Christians. Olaf was just as strong a king as any of the Viking kings. He was just as fierce and brave and violent as they could be. It's just that he was doing it for Christ. He was doing it for Jesus, for the right religion, whereas the pagans were doing it for the wrong religion. So what if the culture itself is violent? Can it make then the religion violent? Is a question. Okay, good. Good to see you all. I will see you next week. Have a good week. Good night.